I'm glad everybody's here tonight. Looks like we have a good crowd for tonight. I just want to say, if you want to know more about what the Sierra Club San Francisco Bay chapter is doing, or specifically the Northern Alameda County group who hosts this event, the best thing to do is go to the chapter website, sierraclub.org/SFBay. You can click on the blog, you can click on contacts and find out all the leadership. A couple issues that the chapter is working on right now is we're working with the Teamsters to have our local communities demand good working practices from Amazon. So they're taking a stand against Amazon's destructive business practices. And this includes in communities and locations in Alameda and Contra Costa counties. We're working with the Greenbelt Alliance and the Center for Biological Diversity and some other big hitters to make sure that the city of Newark considers sea level rise as they work to approve a huge development on their shoreline. And we don't want seawalls coming down the pike as the answer to protect a ill thought of plan from the get-go. The chapter has lots of ways can get involved, again, on the website, including about 8 standing committees. So if you are issue oriented and you want to work on the public lands in the East Bay, energy and climate change, transportation and concrete growth, healthy people, healthy planet, which is an offshoot of the population committee. We realized that just dealing with the population wasn't enough, and they really focus on education for girls and women and health rights and economic rights for women and girls around the world, because that is the best way to control population. And then there's a new committee of food and agriculture and the long-standing political committee. One thing special about the Sierra Club is that we can do political work, and we do a lot of it. That means we interview clients that want to run for public office. We encourage people to run for public offices. We support people. We take position on issues, and it can be very busy. And I must say, I am impressed with the number of meetings that have not skipped a beat in the last 2 years because of this great invention called Zoom and other public meeting spaces. The Sierra Club does have accounts with Zoom, and all the chapter meetings are being held virtually right now. If you like to get out and about, some hiking activities are being done. They are limited right now because of the new strain of COVID, but hopefully they'll be back on the trail because it's pretty safe to be outside with the wind blowing the germs all around. So welcome. And now I am turning the evening over to the women who organized tonight's event, Mahara and Ella. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank everyone for being here. This is an amazing opportunity, and I'm thrilled that you're going to be joining us this evening. My name is Ella Suring, and I'm a junior at Berkeley High School. I created this series with the hope of raising awareness around the challenges youth activists face as stewards for our planets and protectors of our future, because I'm a youth activist, and I know for myself, a lot of teens face mental health challenges related to the destruction of our climate and what our futures are going to look like. So throughout this event, you'll have a chance to explore ways in which we can support youth activists, both for ourselves if you are a youth activist, if you know anyone, or how just going forward in your communities you can be doing this. So tonight's topic is growing up in the age of eco-anxiety. And just a little preemptive, for next month in February, we're going to be having Lucy Garcia join us for a presentation on climate justice for Earth and all beings. So for tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers, Doctors Robert Root and Robin Cooper. Dr. Robert Root is a psychiatrist trained at the Cornell Medical Center in New York City. He was the medical director of child and adolescent psychiatry at California Pacific Medical Center for 8 years. Dr. Root is also the published author of 2 books on photography, including Mine. Dr. Robin Cooper is a San Francisco-based psychiatrist and has been in private practice for over 35 years. She's also a faculty member at UCSF, and she's been a leader in Citizens Climate Lobby and is the co-founder of Climate Psychiatry Alliance. That's a group dedicated to understanding, education, and advocacy about the impacts of climate change on mental health. She's also a frequent speaker on local radio shows and podcasts. And then joining me tonight is Marjana Moini, and she is going to be moderating the chat. She's also the co-host. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to raise your hand. It's also an interactive presentation. So there will be a part of that woven into it. And then we'll also have a question break at the end. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dr. Robert Root, whose presentation is up on the screen right now. Thank you.
I actually think before my my colleague Robert Root takes off with the slide presentation mostly, I just want to make some introductory comments. First off, Ella came to me to talk about doing something with youth and young people. And by perusing who's in attendance tonight, I see that there are a lot of gray hairs. Although some people who have their pictures off may be younger than my particular age group, but we're going to try to look at the kinds of things that impact people across the life cycle and the experiences that we are all having. And I'm just so thankful for this invitation from the Sierra Club because of their activism in making the world a better place to live, and hopefully our future is impacted by all of those activities that have already been laid out. So Robert and I have worked on a slide deck together, and you'll notice when it's one style or the other, and we're going to look at both some of the science behind climate change and the health impacts and the mental health impacts. And we're also going to try to engage in discussion with you about some of your own experiences and thoughts. So that's a lot to do, and want to welcome Robert to get us started.
So I'm going to begin just very briefly by sharing my own path that got me passionately involved in the climate change activism and teaching that I enjoy. Particularly, I enjoy presenting about climate change to teens. I've given many talks to high school students. And Ella, thanks very much for organizing this. For me, the passion I feel about being involved in solving the climate crisis comes from both being a climate reality leader trained by the Climate Reality Project, but it really ties to my love of place and nature. And I'm a photographer, I'm a parent, I'm a physician, I work primarily with kids. All of those passions in my life come together around climate change, and were stimulated by this place, Yellowstone. And the reason Yellowstone is so important to me and really triggered my activism was because of this article in November of 2018 in the New York Times that alerted us that Yellowstone National Park, our country's first and one of the greatest national parks on the planet, was being, the ecosystem and the wildlife were being affected by climate change. And the impacts were such that the article suggested that our children, those of us, who are adults and have children, say people like Ella's age, that they might not ever be able to see and appreciate Yellowstone as we have known it. And that galvanized my signing up for Al Gore's training and taking my son, who was a teen at the time, a few months later to Yellowstone.
So I want to just take this moment. Robert's identified Yellowstone as that place that draws him in his heart and soul. And I imagine if you're a Sierra Club member, there are places that you all have that are those beloved places, those places that you have returned to over and over for solace and wonder and amazement, that draw you to kind of the passion and commitment to saving the world and making it a place to continue. So I'd like, just before we move into the material, for you to pause, think, reflect, get in touch with that place that has meaning to you, and have that as a grounding for the conversation that we go through this evening. Hold that in mind, and maybe we can share those later. But Robert, go ahead on.
Yeah. So this image is one that Al Gore often shares in presentations and trainings, this beautiful 1972 first image from space of the Earth that really highlights its beauty and fragility. And this is really what we're talking about, protecting our planet and all of the life and beloved forms of life, therein. Very briefly, everyone in this audience knows about the sources of greenhouse gases and the impacts. And I'll just mention very briefly, in California, transportation, electric power, production of fossil fuels, 75% of the emissions in our state can easily be transformed into clean energy solutions. So California, more than most places in the world, we know and have the capacity to make change. But the impacts of climate change really are devastating. And particularly now, people around the world are getting, an all too real education about these catastrophic weather events. And the rapidity of and the frequency of these events is escalating. The rate has quadrupled since 1980. And we know there is urgency. The recent IPCC reporting on climate change, based on thousands of high-level scientific studies, for the first time really stated so unequivocally that this is a code red for humanity. And we know that climate change is not only happening now, but there are devastating effects. And it's affecting not only our medical health, but mental health.
And I just want to reflect on where we are at this point in time. This last year has had a lot of disappointments, and particularly for the closing of the COP meetings in Glasgow in November. The British president of COP26, Alok Sharma, ended holding back tears and apologizing. He said he was deeply sorry for how the gathering concluded with last-minute changes to the wording about coal. And I think we all have to face both the marginal kinds of things that are moving forward on the international scene, but simultaneously manage these big disappointments.
And fundamentally, and I like to emphasize this to adolescent audiences, there is no better example of this phrase, "we are in this together," as people, as humans, as members of this planet, than in trying to tackle climate change. And I'm just going to mention briefly, just this summer, the record heat waves in Europe and other places, the record heat in Sicily was astounding. I like to tell high school audiences that the 2 decades in which teenagers have been alive have been the 2 warmest decades in human history. And the last 7 years have been the warmest recorded. I was really struck in these last few years, the parallel between fires, devastating wildfires that we experienced here in Northern California, and then I believe it was 2019 in Southern Australia. And between fire and flood, whether floods in India, China, parts of South America, across the globe, and drought, these horrific periods of drought, all of the extreme variations of weather impacts. This image from Al Gore's group is an area in Brazil that used to be part of the breadbasket of that large nation and is now unable to support growing crops. Whether it's additionally melting glaciers in the Himalayas, in Greenland, trapping heat in the oceans that affect the coral reefs, there are just countless devastating planetary impacts. So what I'd like to share with you with that background is going back a few years to 2017, which seems to me a time that in Northern California, we really crossed a line where life felt different. And I want you to imagine a young child, in Sonoma County who experienced the horrific wildfires in 2017, maybe a child who had to be evacuated with his family or her family. And then again in 2018, 2019, each of these last few years, even if not evacuated, being re-traumatized by the wildfires that spread in that region and beyond. And not only is it a direct impact, but an indirect source of stress and anxiety, because now many of us in the Bay Area think of summer not as, a recreation time, but a fire season. And there's this intense anticipatory anxiety that fire season approaches. And it's no longer just in the fall, it's starting earlier and earlier. And we know these images from the Paradise fires and others. I also want you to try to imagine what it was like for a child in the Caribbean, in the Bahamas, when Hurricane Dorian, approached the Caribbean islands. And if you look at this image, this is a hurricane, a massive hurricane that is now a new normal. And you can see the scale against the southern portion of Florida. And the impact was devastating to people. And these are deeply traumatic events. There are countless health impacts of climate change. And one way I think, Dr. Cooper and I believe we can really mobilize people to take action is thinking of climate change as a health emergency. And that can mean through the heat stress, air pollution, the lack of availability of adequate food and water resources, and in many intersecting ways. Robin, I'm going to have you take over here for a moment.
Thank you for unmuting me. So the interface of health and climate are extraordinarily important and complex. This particular slide is one that is a classic slide that shows some of the complex interplay between the physical health impacts and the mental health impacts and community health impacts. These are all interconnected. And on the left side of this, the graphic shows the kinds of impacts of climate change: drought, massive floods, heat waves, sea level rise, fires, huge mega storms. The inside shows the most vulnerable populations, and those are the elderly, the frail, children, pregnant women. And over and over and over, what we are seeing are, in the realm of health, what we call social determinants of health, the things that influence our capacity to have basically it's poverty and race, over and over are seen as the contributors to the most vulnerability in physical and mental and community health. And on the right side of the graphic, we're seeing the kinds of things that are listed in regards to those health impacts. And Robert's already said some of those in the realm of mental health: stress, anxiety, depression, secondary to big disasters, relationship strains. We're seeing increases in substance abuse, both with extreme heat and with disasters, and of course, post-traumatic stress. And at the community level, we're seeing increased aggression, increased suicide in the face of extreme heat waves. Associated elevated heat waves contribute to aggression and suicide, independent of all of the other contributing variables. And so that increases violence in our community. It's a risk factor for children and women in terms of domestic violence. And we're even seeing it at group violence and international conflicts during extreme heat. And of course, community cohesion. So I want to frame our discussion in terms of these profound impacts. Go on, Robert.
Something interesting that has taken shape is a whole new field of study that I've also gotten involved in about planetary health through Stanford and other universities, and really looking at this very complex intersection, as Robin said, between the health of our environment, of our planet, and human health. And that's above and beyond what some people think of as just shifting patterns of infectious disease. That's concerning enough. And we touched on post-traumatic stress, but the health of our planet is critical to human health in every dimension. And I'll just list here a few of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder that people who have lived through catastrophic floods or had to evacuate, approaching fires go through. Even those that don't have true PTSD may have severe recurrent anxiety as fire season approaches or as hurricane season approaches, because storms are bigger and more destructive than ever. And even for those who don't yet directly have experience of going through these catastrophic weather events, even the depictions in the media add to our stress and threaten our sense of well-being. Very briefly, even COVID, and that has intensified our experience of stress and anxiety about our health, our resilience, and our future. COVID and climate change really intersect. If we continue to damage our forests and don't care for our planet, it will increase the likelihood of further pandemics. And, you know, again, something we must fight against and be well aware of. So I'm going to just briefly begin an introduction of this term, eco-anxiety, and I'm going to have Robin elaborate in more detail. But sometimes people truly feel this sense, will I even have a future? There really is a quality of uncertainty and unpredictability that I know in my lifetime I can only equate to some of the fears in my childhood around, you know, the community and the world around, say, the threat of nuclear weapons and a catastrophic exchange. Now we feel this uncertainty and risk to our future from climate change.
So I want to acknowledge Lisa's comment in the chat. She says, I'm getting really, where it was, I can't find it exactly, but I'm getting really depressed and I'm hoping that this is going to get better. And I expected some ways to manage this. And I think it was, and Suzanne Jones just acknowledged that. And I think that you're bringing up some really important things. We're going to have to deal with, all of us, how we tolerate the extreme big feelings that we're having as we truly confront the experiences that we have, that we are facing, as we are aware of our changing planet and the threats to us, and then how to manage to tolerate that experience and how to deal with that, how to find a place for what I would call realistic hope. I'm going to just talk, Lisa and Suzanne, a little bit more, and I hope I don't drive you down into the dungeons with some of this. But this new concept about eco-anxiety. Eco-anxiety is a big term. It is an undefined term, although for the first year, the last 2021, it was introduced as a word in the Oxford Dictionary. So I guess it's getting some clout, and clearly it's something we're experiencing more and more. But it refers to that big umbrella of feelings. I call it an umbrella of feelings about the experience of living in the world that is changing for us. It can at times be unregulated and overwhelming states of anxiety, worry. And Lisa, you mentioned depression. So there's a lot of grief. And grief is an experience of what we have when we experience something that we have lost. Anxiety and worry is about the experience of what we think we might face in the future. So they kind of are time sensitive. It can be driven by obsessive thoughts and ruminations, and it can oscillate kind of between states of being completely shut down or overwhelmed with intrusive thoughts. Robert, you want to go on? And it has, as I said, a range of different feelings. These extreme states of distress are what we call climate grief. It encompasses those feelings of what we're now beginning to call pre-traumatic stress, anticipating the future. And another word that's new, and I'll go on to it in a minute, is solastalgia. But we also need to pay attention to how we grapple with these big feelings, since we all have to cope psychologically with managing these feelings. And sometimes, and I think you probably all are aware of this, there is an experience for many people of complete denial, or another more subtle term of what is called disavowal, which is really a psychological state of keeping something in your head in a place of, I know that, but in another emotional way, experiencing, I'm not going to be touched by that. I'll get away with this fine. And that kind of split can be very emotionally soothing. And on the left side, there's a study from Yale communications group that just gives us some sense that more and more Americans are worried about this. Can you go on, Robert, in the next slide? Even we're beginning to see in a group of young people a sense that I'm not sure I can have children. This struggle between should I have children or should I not? And that's a very profound emotional experience for these young millenniums. Next slide. And young children. This is a slide, and you can't read it very well, but a really important study that came out just before COP26, which was done by some researchers, some of whom are my colleagues, that looked at 10,000 young people between age 16 and 25 with a survey, 10 countries. And that what they found, which was not surprising, is that young people are concerned. And thank God they're leading the way for many of us. But the depth of their concern was really, really surprising. These young people acknowledged that their concerns about climate change and their worries were interfering with their daily function in significant ways. And they made an important connection that they are absolutely worried that governments are not responding adequately, and they experience this as a betrayal. And we've all seen that in some of the youth leaders who are great voices in this regard. Next slide.
And I'm going to mention, I had done a study myself at California Pacific Medical Center in 2019. One of my residents and I interviewed almost 100 kids ages 12 to 18. And again, this is in early 2019, before the study that Robin mentioned. And of kids in the Bay Area, 88% of them reported feeling a real significant concern about climate change. Most of them acknowledge climate change as real and happening now, but 2/3 described very discrete anxiety symptoms. And interestingly, most of the kids highlighted the fear of sea level rise, especially in big cities around the world. But obviously we're a coastal city here in San Francisco, and the impacts, in addition to some of the other weather events, the impact of sea level rise on major cities, including Miami, New York, Mumbai, Shanghai, is another set of catastrophic possibilities. So again, as Robin and I like to do, we want to encourage you to imagine the state of being a young person, a child, a teenager, with your future ahead of you, but recognizing this uncertainty about the safety of our environment. Is the earth reliable? Is there a foundational insecurity going forward about our having access to sufficient water supply? Two of my favorite towns that I've been fortunate to visit, Cape Town in South Africa and Chennai in South India, each of them suffered in the last 5 years a catastrophic drought where virtually the entire water supply for these major cities was depleted. And that will be more likely and more widespread into the future. But we know that millions of people in every region of the earth, on every continent now, have personal experience of these consequences about climate change. So our distress, whether we've experienced things directly in our communities or a little more indirectly through the media, our level of concern and distress and anguish makes sense. It's understandable. And some of that anxiety is, as we'll talk about, something that really can motivate us to take action. And that's key.
So I want to move into a realm of both talking about eco-anxiety or these distress syndromes, in some ways of both normalizing and thinking about it and responding. But I take solace from this particular comment from Joanna Macy, who's a Buddhist scholar in our own Bay Area here and a real leader in this realm. And she really gives us an important statement about the suffering here. This is a dark time filled with suffering and uncertainty. And like living cells in a larger body, it's natural that we feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel or the anger or fear, because these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings. And I think Joanna Macy is a beautiful voice to listen to. And I want to just reflect. E.B. White, who wrote those wonderful books, Charlotte's Web and Stuart Little's, had a different point of view. He said he woke up every day with the struggle between deciding to savor or save the planet. And I think we're all kind of in that situation. And I think we should probably move to some of the things around ways to respond. So let's move more quickly through the next several slides.
So I'm just going to mention very briefly, as we've touched on climate grief as another form of our distress, really a sense to, I mean, I've heard teens describe this sense of, and adults feel it too, this sense that the earth is sick or dying, just like, you know, an ill parent or grandparent. And developmentally, people of different ages experience this in different ways. You know, young children that I talk to in the Bay Area, when the Australian wildfires happened, their greatest sadness was picturing these beautiful Australian animals, you know, who died in the fire, koalas and kangaroos. For teenagers, you know, the capacity to think much more deeply and that true sense of existential struggle is really about, can human life survive as we are faced with increasing risk to our planet? Not only human life, but species extinction is another concern that young people, I think, really champion. I'm someone, I devote, you know, a lot of passion to conservation and wildlife conservation, and the loss of biodiversity is a huge concern. We know that by the end of this century, 50% of species could be lost. And I put a lot of passion in my photography to the love of wildlife around us, and these iconic species could be lost. So I want to pose the question, facing all of this sadness, grief, anxiety, frustration, and anger, what can we do about it emotionally and in terms of activism?
So before you go on to this slide, Robert, can you go back and maybe we can just pause for a minute instead of, and move from just us talking at you to asking you specifically some of your own experiences. Robert's kind of said the range of things that trouble lots of people deeply. But I want to put to you, what is it that keeps you up at night? What are the things that are your worries? What are the things that are the the hurts that you're experiencing that make this an important issue for you. And I'd like to open the floor a little bit to have a few people respond so that we can put this in the context of us together tonight. So is it possible, Ella, to open the mics or the unmute people and see if anyone wants to share a little bit about what it is that keeps you up at night, what you struggle with.
If you want to raise your hand, if you have anything to share, we can unmute you, or if you're able to unmute yourself, you can do that too.
Yeah, everybody's able to unmute themselves, so you should be able to.
A brave soul.
So I kind of think I'm the person Robin described, that somehow I logically know all this is happening, but somehow when I see something that's not right, the way I cope with it is that what can I do to fix it? And I have been in the settings that people say, oh, we can't fix it, or this can't happen. And that somehow just doesn't get in my brain. So somehow I have this, you know, what you described, that I have this emotional side that's separate. It says the host won't let unmute themselves. Yeah, I'm sorry if you can't unmute yourself. Let me make sure I'll fix this. I thought I did. So you should be able to. It says allow participants to unmute themselves. You should be able to unmute yourself, but who is it? If you raise your hand, then.
Now we can.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. Lucy, did you want to talk?
Oh, I didn't want to interrupt though.
No, I'm done.
Okay, so what keeps me up at night is people, right? You know, I have an immense faith that the earth can repair itself if we just let it. There's so many stories of just allowing, where the places which we allow to come back, they come back. But what I'm mostly afraid of is the bad training that we've had for, you know, what us, we don't believe in ourselves anymore, right? We've done all these amazing things that have created this, you know, 85% of the world reads, right? We can fight pandemics if we hang together. But the problem is, you know, just that you know, that human disintegration is what most.
I hear you. We have so many capabilities, and will we use them? Anyone else? Anyone else? I don't want to
Liz,
rush through this.
Liz wanted to speak, and I think, let me see.
I'm not sure everyone can unmute. Ella, can you do something to fix that?
You know, it's my fault. I kind of started.
While you're trying to unmute people, I'm going to read WM. I would say world leaders who have a lot of power, who seem to care more about the short-term profits or prestige rather than the long-term well-being of the planet, doing a lot of damage really fast and burning of the rainforest. I think it is very likely many of us share this big horror that our consumptive economy and our profit-driven, and I'm just going to say it, capitalism, are massive problems, that and the political control. But that's one of the things I see so wonderful about Sierra Club, addressing some of political solutions. Robert, could you hold off on that one?
Okay.
Just in terms of, Marginaire, are you able to unmute people?
Yeah, Liz is unmuted. Liz, did you want to speak?
Yes, I did. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
perfect.
You know, like a lot of people, I feel desperately just devastated by what this planet is going to be like in 30 or 50 years. I won't be here, but I feel terrible about where we are headed. And like a lot of people, I try to figure out what can I, you know, I'm just one person, what can I do, or what have I done to, you know, make things worse or make things better? I'll say right off the bat, the best thing I did was I didn't have any children. I did not add to the human overpopulation of this planet. And then the next thing I can do is like, well, why am I here? You know, every day I live, I know I'm using up Earth's resources that, you know, perhaps I shouldn't be using them up. Everybody who lives in America has an enormous carbon footprint, you know, and what can we do? You know, okay, we put in a heat pump. We try to be as efficient as we can, you know, we got a plug-in car, you know, but we're still using up the Earth's resources. And so like, what else can we do? What else? Chuck.
I think Lisa has some comments.
Well, I just wanted to say that, you know, all that has been said so far is what bothers me. This keeps me up. I mean, you know, it's like, it's so awful. I really can hardly bear to even hear it. I mean, I'm not really one to hide my head in the sand, but I almost feel in this case, I just have to turn away. I just have to like focus on something that I feel like I can do, you know. There's little things in my life that I can do that I hope is some kind of a contribution to the world in one way or another, but it just feels so completely overwhelming. I mean, I really am liable to get too depressed when I think about climate change and, you know, everything that's happening to the earth.
I'm actually gonna ask Robert to move the slide along at this moment, because I feel like, Lisa, you've introduced a challenge that I think we are all facing. And particularly you've laid out that kind of like, put your head in the sand or get away from this, or feeling overwhelmed. And this slide came out just after COP. And I think this represents the challenge to us. There are dichotomous places to be. You can be, we are all fucked, or there is a better place, or sometimes a Pollyannish statement. I think the challenge for us psychologically is to not be in the two extremes, to not split into the good and bad, to not be defeated and that things are so bad, we're so fucked, or everything's going to be okay. There is a middle. And I think the psychological challenge is to hold that middle, to tolerate the knowledge, but also, and I think it was Liz before who said that she didn't have children, but you know, how do you manage the consumption and cutting our own individual contributions? It's that middle ground of participating, of experiencing and managing our feelings well enough so that we can use our distress to engage in effective ways. And I don't think we can do this alone. This is not something we can do as individuals. It requires us to do it in community, in engagement with other people, both in managing the eco distress experiences and to be effectively involved in solutions. So I'm going to turn it over to Robert, and I'll be back in a few minutes.
And, you know, in response to Lisa, your comment, you know, I do want us to go in a way where we're swinging in the pendulum from the beginning of our talk that can truly feel overwhelming. All of these catastrophic events, all of these negative, overwhelming feelings, emotions, and impacts. But I do want to shift to this notion of engagement and resilience and taking action. We know that anxiety can motivate us to take action, and there are very positive actions that we can do that can help manage our stress and contribute in, a global way to adapting and combating climate change. So Robin, I wanted you to address this before I go on to other, say, practical steps that people can take.
So this is just some guidance of how to manage some of the overwhelming emotional states, those floods of anxieties, those moments of eco distress that Lisa, you've already often said can be overwhelming. And these are my R's, and they're similar to what's been put out about managing COVID. And I've left one out, but let me say, I think it's important that we all find moments of rest in between the periods of activism to restore ourselves in ways that work for us personally, to find routines, to find ways for relaxation and recreation, and to establish those connected relationships that help us both to tolerate our emotional states, but also our engagement in the world. And so the last R that I left off of here was resistance, engagement in effective resistance to the political and social situations that we find ourselves in. And all of these then build an internal sense of stress resiliency.
So I do want to go over just briefly. I'm sure most of you in this audience are well aware of some of the tangible things we can do, but there really are solutions at hand. And, again, I like to present these images of young people. This is the San Francisco youth climate strike of a couple of years ago. That kind of activism really gets world attention and leaders' attention. You guys know the capacity of clean energy, wind and solar, especially in California, but many parts of the world. We can truly transform our power grid. Renewable energy and reforestation are both very significant contributors to, as someone said, really restoring the health of our planet. I love this example that I learned about in the country Ethiopia, a country of a lot of poverty and high population and limited resources. In less than 24 hours, the government sanctioned and encouraged every member of that nation, of that large community, to plant trees. And in less than 24 hours, they planted over 220 million trees. I had to cross-check that was accurate, but I confirmed it. We know about shifting to a plant-based diet and composting as something we need to do, not just as individuals or even as families, but encourage other communities to do. A very simple thing that I love sharing with teens to get their parents involved is to shift your own family's payments for electricity to a Clean Power SF or the equivalent in the East Bay or North Bay or South Bay to only purchase clean energy. Now, Project Drawdown is a project that I think does tremendous education about significant interventions. I'm just going to mention briefly. Many of you probably know this concept of drawdown, the point at which the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere, which has been steadily going up since pre-industrial time, now is at 419 points per million. We need to reverse that and get it to trend downward to at least roughly a target of 350 parts per million. And that point at which the trend up begins to stop and reverse is drawdown. And Project Drawdown is an extraordinary book that some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. And the project really outlines major things that we can do. I like to say we don't need to sequester carbon with some previously unknown technology. Nature sequesters carbon through photosynthesis and protecting our forests. Reforestation can contribute significantly, decreasing food waste, the design of our buildings and energy efficiency, transportation. There are so many things that we can personally and as a community insist upon from local and state and federal government. So we really can shape our climate future. And I came up with an acronym as I was falling asleep about 2 months ago, because I was starting to plan a talk for teenagers. And I came up with an acronym that summarizes, in my mind, the most important things about what we can do to fight climate change. So this is one word that I want you to remember. And my acronym is AARDVARC. And you'll see why that's important. So for me, the AA in Aardvark is for us to participate in activism and advocacy, to be involved in communal organizations, to volunteer, to protest, to write to Congress people, to impact world leaders. One of the organizations I learned about through my own teenage son's involvement are organizations like Extinction Rebellion and, the Transgenerational People's Climate March. The Sierra Club has always been one of the great leaders in this fight for the climate and clean water, clean air. I'm proud to be a member really believe in all of their advocacy. My Climate Reality Project. The R in Aardvark is for resilience. Part of that is climate adaptation.
Robert,
I'm sorry?
do you know your slides are no longer showing? So,
Really?
yeah.
Oh. Let me see if I can get them back. I didn't realize that. When did that start? Can
On
you
the
see them
aardvark.
now?
On the aardvark, but we shouldn't spend forever on that, but
Can you see them now or not?
no.
I don't know what happened. Let me see if I have to screen share again. I didn't touch anything. Let me see if I can pull up the screen share again and get it right back.
And while Robert is dealing with technology, I'm going to use this opportunity because I do think his aardvark has some important things and helps to see them, and also
Is this visible?
Pardon me?
Is this now visible?
No.
Okay, let me try it again, but I'll have you keep talking.
But while we're doing that, each of us have enormous strengths that we draw upon personally to both manage our own internal feelings as we simultaneously face the challenges. So maybe we can, in addition to sharing some of the things that we've already talked about, I'm going to ask you, and Robert will go back to this, to be thinking about the things that you bring to this, that you're proud of. But I also wanted to just acknowledge some of the things that have already been said, that were put in the chat about the things that you're so distressed about. One, I think somebody said the killing of animals for sport. And I think that represents the disregard for our interconnectedness with the natural world. And so I appreciate that comment. Other comments have been about the massive growth in population, but how despite the population growth, our consumption has gone up, and we've got to get on top of that massive consumption. And SJ, I don't know who that is, said to say goodbye to things that we love, the endings that we're seeing over and over. And those are those things of distress. But we, as Robert is doing, he's laying out some of those ways that we can make a difference in the world. And I'm asking you, as we're listening to him, to also think about what emotional strengths you bring to manage these big feelings. So go back, Robert, and then we'll go back to that in our discussion.
Okay, is this now visible?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna do this fairly briefly, but in terms of this acronym, the R for resilience is resilience in our infrastructure, but resilience as well. And Robin and I really talked about this, emotional resilience and the resilience we get in our community by working together and supporting each other. The D in Aardvark is for some of these drawdown solutions. And I won't go over the details right now, so we save time, but there is a wonderful pie chart that shows relative contributions of different actions that we can take in major ways. Voting is key. We must get our political process to support, to fund, and to create legislation to put this into place. We see the frustration with the Build Back Better situation right now. The A is for actions you can take, including in families. You know, having 100% clean energy be what you purchase for your home, even if you can't afford solar panels. If you can, that's great. You know, dietary issues. California has always been a leader in clean technology and clean energy legislation. One of the few bright spots from COP26 was this agreement to start limiting methane, one of the most, you know, powerful greenhouse gases that we, and the New York Times did a remarkable article revealing how much leaks from the natural gas production. The R in Aardvark is really about redirecting our money, you know, divesting from fossil fuels, supporting companies that we believe in that are supporting net zero emissions, and not allowing the government to subsidize fossil fuel companies. And then finally, the K in Aardvark is keeping our connection. As Robin said, it's so important to our mental well-being to feel that we are part of an organization, and for young people to feel that they're part of a global movement that also stands for social and climate justice. And I like to think of it as a connection across all cultures and continents. So that's Aardvark. If you remember the acronym, it'll help you remember things that we can do.
And I have a different K. I have a K that is keep the faith, and how to keep that faith. And here is my, because I'm a doc, I used to actually write prescriptions on paper, but here are some of my particular prescriptions for sustaining that engagement that we all need. But before I go on to that, I'm going to acknowledge in the chat, TS, I don't know who TS, has really important parts of that prescription: compassion, empathy, learning, and sharing grounding. And I'm so appreciative of that. And someone also just mentioned, don't look up. We'll talk about that after. But my prescription, I think we have to both accept the severity and the complexity of this problem. We cannot ignore reality. That is essential. We also have to be attuned and grieve the real losses that this implies and has brought upon us, but also to cherish the possibilities and simultaneously tolerate that we're limited to make those in what we can do, that there's a realistic awareness of your own contributions, and that to be proud of what you do and humble about what others do, so it doesn't have to feel like you have to do it all. We're all participants and can have a part in this. Do what you enjoy and do well, because that's sustaining. If you do something that just is drudgery, you're not going to be able to sustain it. But as you take on doing things that you enjoy, take risks, push yourself into that little bit of a challenge in new areas. And that means some psychological and political and social growth. Focus on problem-solving activities. Engage yourself with things where there's doable things. Pace yourself, and in terms of creating community, lean on others. You are not in this alone. Do the work and draw from others, which I think sustains and heals some of the emotional wounds. Next slide.
So we're going to wrap up and then leave time for questions, but I really do want to end on a note of hope and mutual interconnectedness, a mutual sense that we can and must take action. I feel so passionately, and I know you do too, there is nothing more important than protecting our planet and our future, and for our children and their children. The last image I want to share with you is this image I took in the Mediterranean a few years ago of the setting sun on this just beautiful night. And when I took this photo, it represented to me just an image of the beauty of the planet, the beauty of the earth, water, air, sky, sun. But when I've looked at this image recently, it has these overtones of that orange sky we saw in the Bay Area some months ago. And I can't help but see simultaneously the beauty of this image and the sense of risk, that this is sort of one of these wildfires looming in the distance. And that's really the challenge we face.
So for me, we hold the earth in our hands, and what we do now will have an impact on the future of the way the planet will be. We are not going to solve all of the damage that's been done, but we can make a difference in what the future is. And I'd like to open our conversation to both the challenge that I asked of you before. What strengths do you bring? What ways do you already manage the emotional stresses? Because I believe if you can manage the emotional stresses effectively, we can put that to good use in our world. And I'm going to just as we open up the conversation, just remind everybody here that our local leader, Nancy Pelosi, her theme is don't agonize, organize. But that means really being able to modulate and manage our emotional lives, our internal feelings about this. So what thoughts do you have? What do you bring to manage your own distresses and give you some solace and activity in the external solutions? Or questions or anything. This is an open discussion.
Unmute us.
Are you guys unmuted?
No, Deanna is not, Liz is not.
Ugh. Unmute yourselves.
Not everybody can. Doesn't work.
I think I'm unmuted, Robin.
Yeah, hey, Patrice.
Hi, so thank you so much. And first, thank you, Ella, so much for organizing this and for the speakers. So I am Patrice Sutton. I'm with San Francisco Bay PSR. But I guess, so as those of you who know me, I have worked in environmental health. So I don't know if this will be helpful, but so for me, there's this tremendous disconnect between the size of the problem and any one of us, so you have this gigantic gap. But when I started in public health school 1,000 years ago, I was in occupational health, and everyone, there's a great concern, which of course still exists, about like exposures to toxic chemicals and, these big exposures. But while that's also still important, over the years, what became more and more clear scientifically is that these like small cumulative exposures over time really have huge impacts on our health. So I guess for me, I kind of, in terms of dealing with this mismatch between the size of the problem and any one individual, is this idea that we're just this drop, but cumulatively over time, you contribute and so in my work, it's really true, because if you think about ionizing radiation or toxic chemicals, it's, small exposures over time can give you very profound health impacts. So it works in both directions, of course. So we have eroded voting rights drip by drip over time, and we have a big problem about that. But the same is also true. So I guess just as a coping strategy, I would just say that kind of viewing oneself and realizing that you're a grain of sand, so you have to do what your grain of sand is going to do, but there's like a whole beach. And I've been very privileged over the years in knowing people all around the world who, talk about, difficult things, trying to abolish nuclear weapons, let's say. So, but there's a world of other people out there who are also, pushing their rock in the direction. And so I think if you think of it as cumulative exposures, cumulatively over time, by each of us just doing what we can in our place, it is, I'm not saying it's going to be successful, because I think that, it's the only hope we have. So I guess I also feel that one is a product of one's context. And so in our context right now, this is what we can do, and we really don't know what the future will bring, but many people who've come way before us have influenced me, so one can only hope you do your part while you're here. Thank you.
Patrice reminds me of my favorite folk singer, John McCutcheon, who sings a wonderful union organizing song, Step by Step, the longest march can be won, can be won, and goes on. And I'm missing some of my memory is not so sharp, but he ends with singly none, but clearly we can all add to that each grain of sand does add together to make a beach.
we just speak?
Liz, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, and not a question. I was
Oh.
just going to respond to
Yep.
what you are asking us to say, and that is something you can try to do, which I do pretty much every day, is like sort of keep a ledger in my head of how much of the Earth's resources did I use up, and what did I give up. And every day it's like, okay, I drove my car over here. On the other hand, I wrote to a bunch of voters in Wisconsin telling them, to do this, so every day it's like, okay, this is in the black. I did this good thing, but then over here, I also drove my car. And, if everyone does that, at the end of the day, you'll probably end up where I am. And that is, I'm always in the red. I am always using up more of the Earth's resources than I can tangibly say I am giving back. And that is like super depressing. But as we have also discussed here today, reach out and be involved, find your community. And I have this thing taped up in my kitchen. It's a page from that book. I don't know if y'all remember Julia Butterfly Hill years ago, spent, 2 years living in a tree to try to stop the deforestation of our old growth redwoods in Northern California. And the thing she wrote that so inspires me, I look at it, and even though I feel like I'm beating my head against a wall, what she wrote is, we do the right thing because it is the right thing to do, regardless of the outcome. So no matter how hard it is, how futile it seems, how impossible and depressing, we have to keep doing what we can do. I'm part of Extinction Rebellion. I've shut down banks and, done stuff in the redwoods. And I don't know how much it changed things, but, we have to keep trying. Check.
Bravo.
Can you hear me?
Can
Hello?
can we hear the people who had their hands raised?
Yeah, I think Diana
Up for the
is the
longest
next
time.
one. Diana is, did I pronounce your name correctly? Diana or Diana?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much. I'm on a phone, so I may leave the video off if it's not coming out correctly, but I'll say hello. I just wanted to thank the presenters. It was an excellent overview of, how to look at the situation, how to get active, and how it's impacting our options day to day. And I also really value everyone's honest take on where they can make a change and where we're limited. So thank you, Drs. Root and Cooper. That was really informative. And I just wanted to say that I feel aghast, really, that at 22, I learned about this issue. And I believed that everyone would hear about this within a few years and we would take action. And I'm almost 52. So there have been 3 decades lost. It's just, it's astounding. And I do know so many people are making changes, but so many people are ignoring the issue. So I would say to the young people, it is time to be radical and to say, I love this planet. You can't steal this away from me. This is beautiful. This is rich. This is vital, and it belongs here with us. So, I hate that I'm saying for them to do this. I am doing this in my own way, but writing poems, creating love letters, sending them to your Congress people, young people can do those things. And I think when enough voices are heard, it's a way in which the issue can no longer be hidden.
Robert, I'm just going to ask you to stop sharing so that we can see each other better.
I'm just going to put up your email, Robin, just for a moment for.
I'll just stick that in the chat so that we
Okay.
can open it up so people can see each other.
Okay, let me come out.
Can hear you.
Doug, do you want to make your comment?
Sure. I believe the consensus is strongly to root yourself in reality, to not hang on to delusion. And I strongly endorse that. And for I guess people like myself and many other people on this presentation, the reality is that things are worse than we currently know. And they most assuredly will get worse before they get better. That's the consensus of the scientific community. And I think that's, again, grounding in reality based on trends that are pretty readily observable.
Yeah, that's right.
So the almost magical grasping for hope is not grounded in reality. And I saw some of that in the presentation this evening. But that leaves us with, what do we do in the absence of real hope? And I meditate. I spend a fair amount of time with my own mind, and I observe that my anxiety and grief and hopelessness are not really as bad as I would imagine. That I am internally resilient and that I do cope with those. And that were I to go out in the world and advertise or maybe even preach this sense of hopelessness, in high anxiety, in extreme distress, in depression, I would be self-indulgent. So again, one of my main, I guess you would classify it as coping mechanisms. I consider it a mental health attribute practice, is I meditate and I understand my own mind. I understand the difference between being rooted in reality and being self-indulgent in how I characterize that reality.
And I wanna just thank you, Doug, for that recommendation, for that careful attention through the meditative process. I think it's extremely powerful tool. And I also want to just use your sense that the desperation and the severity of the state that we're in, and let people know about Jen Bendel's work, who has looked at the collapse and coming out and truly grieving the collapse of our potential societies and coming out with some ideas about managing that. So Jen Bendel is another resource that might be of use.
And then I wanted to finish up with two, I guess, what I think are underemphasized aspects of this dilemma. One is, what am I willing to sacrifice? I ask myself that frequently. And collectively, if we do not each sacrifice and do it in a big way, we're not collectively going to make the impact that we want. If we keep pointing fingers at other people and other entities and ask them to sacrifice and ask them to make major sacrifice without being willing to sacrifice ourselves, we are quite frankly the hypocrites that we hate. So concentrating on what am I willing to sacrifice, and consequently feeling good about the sacrifices that I make. I think Liz made that point. Is one of the underplayed, underemphasized parts. And a second one is, what is tactical, strategic, and effective? I saw Robin and Robert throw a bunch of flat on the wall, and a bunch of it is not tactical, strategic, or effective. So keep looking. I keep searching, but everybody should keep looking at what is really going to make, what's going to be the best effective use of our own talents, and not just do the feel good things. I'm gonna finish real quick.
We have 1 minute left.
And lastly, the most satisfying thing that I find in this whole dilemma is taking action. If I can actually do something positive each day, and the more I do, the better my mental health is. And I know I took up a long time, but thank you for your.
No, and I completely appreciate your comments, Doug. I think you've brought us to an important place. Do what is, I don't think all actions are equally effective, but I think we have to do what we're capable of doing, and that we all have a way to contribute. And Ella, I'm going to turn it, or Marginaire, we're kind of at the end, I think, so I'm going to turn it back to you guys.
Thank you, Robin. So Ella, do you have any closing comments for the next session?
Well, not to get too far into it, but our next presenter is Lucy Garcia, and she is here. But if she does want to say something, just looking forward to next time.
Robin, from the bottom of my heart, Robin and Robert, thank you so much for this presentation. I personally learned a lot, and it was very moving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you. So I don't.
Thank you.
Next week we're going to do what Robin and Robert have been asking us to do, and that is to mobilize our grief and realize our connection to the earth. And then we're going to, and it's not just to feel good, it's in order to effectively take action, because not everybody is an activist, but we all affect people, right? There's a wonderful saying that says that, these people say, art eats strategy for breakfast, which I love, because we have to change the culture, the thinking of people, and all of us can do that by talking. And another thing that I'd like to leave behind here too is that we've come through a lot worse. We have come through a lot worse. People have come through a lot worse. There's people in our country who have gone through 95% extinction of their people. There are people in our country who have gone through, 300 years of slavery, where their children were going to be raised, were sold away from them and going to be raised in slavery under the lash. So those communities have means also of learning, of combining and self-acceptance, and you don't have to be perfect. We can overcome this thing by working together, and there's a lot to be learned all over the place about effective action. So just to give a sense of the breadth of kind of action that is available to people. Just look at what kinds of things have contributed to Black liberation, right? What kinds of things have, it's art, it's poetry, it's feeding your neighbor, it's all kinds of things, right? I just wanted to put that out there for all of us. And I agree, don't be hopeful. Try to find what you can do effectively. And we are the communicative species. We're the collaborative species. That's our superpower. That's who we are. Why all this talking? if we're not collaborative. You know, that's what we're for on this face of this earth. So, you know, we have to mobilize that. How many of us talk about climate change to other people? How many of us actually, you know, encourage other people about their own goodness and about, you know, trusting themselves and being together in this thing? You know, we don't, you know, that's hard. That's a hard conversation to have, right? So.
Thank you all. We're going to say goodbye because Robin is on the East Coast, so way past her bedtime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Robin and Robert. And Ella, more than everybody.
Thank you, Marjana. And thank you
Thank
to
you, Ella.